Hello, and welcome to the Tonic Accord. I don't know about you guys, but it seems like in this current political landscape, each podcast, news source, or opinion comes with a spin. Sometimes the spin takes you to the far left, other times the far right. Sometimes you don't even know that the spin is there, but in general, there seems to be a lack of a moderate voice in the media and in politics. Here at the Tonic Accord, we are truly hoping to help the middle get a voice and to provide people with a centered and balanced message. A tonic chord is a very important reference in many forms of music. It describes two extreme notes, a high and a low, resonating simultaneously. In this chord, the addition of the middle note helps anchor down the sound, and it creates somewhat of a harmony and agreement between the other, more extreme notes. This can be a good metaphor for the importance of cooperation and discussion in politics. A country needs a moderate and sensible center to bring the outer extremes together. Good harmony is not only important for everyone, but it is better for the social fabric. And with that, let's get after it. All right, hello everybody, and welcome back to the Tonic Accord. Sorry we missed you guys last week. The 4th of July made aligning our plans a little bit difficult, but we're back at it, and looks like there's lots to cover today. Like usual, the news is just sprinkled with stories left and right here, and I think today we're going to try to touch on the border crisis, which ties into Trump's push and then decline of getting a citizenship question in 2020. And then we'll brush up on some other news, such as the Epstein scandal and the Democratic candidates and what's going on with them. So I'm Alex Capitco. I studied political science and Spanish, and I am currently living in Madrid, working for the community of Madrid.
Hello, my name is Drew Nepoli. I also studied political science at Chapman University, and I'm currently working in political media in Los Angeles. I'm excited for this episode because it has been consistently a large topic for the last few years.
Oh, me too. And, I think you really can't turn on the news or go into news sites without seeing something about the border fabricated crisis, real crisis, child detentions, family separation. There's just so many catchphrases that you're seeing everywhere now that it's getting pretty ridiculous.
Right. I mean, yeah, ever since the whole build the wall phrase became popular, it's been a dividing line for a lot of Americans as far as where they stand on the current immigration issue. So that's what we are going to delve into today, and how that pertains to the 2020 census. Really interesting stuff. Really interesting stuff. So first to get started is, what is this humanitarian crisis? Well, I think, first of all, we have to recognize where it's coming from, right? I think for a lot of Americans in the past, it has been an issue with Mexican immigration, but that has been shifting. That has been shifting to areas like Honduras and Guatemala and some of these really impoverished nations that have a lot of gang violence. So that's the key, right? There's a massive amount of people that are either just trying to immigrate to the United States, whether it's legally or illegally. And then there's also a portion of people that are coming from those really gang violent nations and looking for asylum and trying to be refugees. So there's a certain distinction that we have to set up first is someone an immigrant or are they a refugee? Because that's a very distinct definition and it means different things, right? And so a refugee is someone that is fleeing persecution or a serious famine or something very dire. And we just have to so I think it's important that we figure out what we're dealing with as far as what this humanitarian crisis actually is, and how do we differentiate between people as they're coming into the country.
Yes, completely. And I just wanted to kind of bounce off what you just said there. And I think actually that is why this has become such a legally and politically disastrous series of events that are happening at the border right now. Is I think it's because we really can't define if these people are all the time immigrants or if all the time these people are refugees, because I think the two terms and the nature of these people trying to come and cross the border is so intertwined with both. it's
Right.
kind of a chicken before the egg, or the egg before the chicken argument. Is are they fleeing for work because of the bad events occurring in their country, or are they refugees fleeing it? Like, I think they're so intertwined that it's really hard to find that line between it.
Right. Um, and so I think we have to also look to the past, right? A lot of, I mean, again, a lot of U.S. policy and U.S. law is built on precedent.
Right.
So if we look into the past of how have we dealt with massive influx of immigration as well as refugees, we'll see an interesting trend. So I brought up something from the Migration Policy Institute. It was looking at U.S. refugee admissions and refugee resettlement ceilings from 1980 to 2018, right? So this goes through Trump administration stuff
Right.
coming from the 1980s. And in the 1980, the annual ceiling, right, the cap of absolutely the cap of amount of people will let in as refugee status was 231,000, and then we admitted as refugee status 207,000 in 1980. That drastically declined after that, down to 70,000 cap in 1984. It went up
Wow.
in the 90s. Now this is, you have to remember too that during the 80s and 90s, a lot of these were Middle Eastern immigrants and Soviet Jews coming from the recently torn down Iron Curtain.
Right.
So again, it's like the demographics of where these people have come from has changed drastically over time. But it's a pretty big decrease going into the 2000s, where we're only admitting 70,000 here. Pretty much 70,000 is like the standard cap. And then
Okay.
and we weren't even admitting half of that. So in 2001 it was 69,000, 2002 is 27,000, 2003 is 28,000. So we don't really ever we only meet the cap, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 years out of almost 40. And then if you look right here at through 2016, the cap drastically declines.
Gotcha.
Down to 45,000, and then we only admit 22,000. So what my point is when people talk about open borders, right? People don't want open borders. I think that's a mischaracterization of policy, because we've always had one. Again, it's talking about refugee status, and we've had caps. Right. We have an understanding that, look, we can't just take everyone. It has to be something that we take a certain amount. Other people, right, in Europe, they've been hammering this out as well, as how many Syrian refugees does each country allow. And but everyone's talking about caps, because you can't just open the floodgates, so to speak. But you do want to handle a humanitarian crisis. But it's just interesting to see that since the Trump administration, they've been drastically declining the cap of refugees that they're even willing to take a look at, and then even then they're only admitting in half of that cap. So the idea that we don't have any room or whatever based on policy is just not true.
That's an interesting point, and part of me has to agree with you, but also part of me disagrees a little bit, because I think that we have to kind of define what it means to legally take in refugees, but then also know that while those caps, as you said, have been maintained pretty low, we are still having a large influx of, refugees and more illegal immigrants and asylum seekers. And I think that though actual legal refugees has remained quite low, we're seeing kind of a surge in different issues, because I was reading that it's impossible to say for certain, but the U.S. Border Patrol says it has made 593,507 Southwest border apprehensions since October of 2018. That is 200,000 more than the previous fiscal year.
Yeah.
And so, and I think it's an interesting distinction, because it's true that the U.S. is thought of a country of immigrants and a country that has always been welcoming, but really history says the opposite. We actually really have been quite closed off for most of it. And so I think that is maybe why we're seeing such a, I guess, apprehension and kind of a second guessing of these people that are trying to cross the southern border, along with letting in Muslim refugees, is because I think with globalization and with all these issues around the world that we're seeing, I think a lot of Americans are just very hesitant about the other. And I think ever since Build That Wall and kind of the rhetoric of Trump, things have only gotten worse. But there is an ounce of truth to it, is that America's changing, obviously for the better. I think we could agree on that. But at the same time, I don't know if the country is fully ready for these large amounts of immigrants without any plan or rationale on how to deal with them once they're in.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like in history that there is always these like the ebb and flow of migration, right? It seems like there's always a huge influx of a certain ethnic group, whether it's an Irish at one point, Chinese at one point, Mexicans at a certain point, and there's always, and every single time that happens, there's always a social distrust of the new guy, so to speak, right? The new guy in the office, as far as joining the United States. I mean, going back to your number, I mean, the fact that there's been, 600,000 since October 2018, that's a lot. That is really a lot. And of course, we can't, it's not the type of thing where you just let them in, stamp a paper, and let them be, right? We do have to have a complex process of, well, is there any form of identification? Are we looking at criminal record? And these are the things that they're doing, right? This is part of the process. But oftentimes these people won't have any identification. And it's difficult. It is very difficult.
Yes.
But one of the other stats that I think is scary and important to remember is that in 2019 alone, 170 migrants have died near the U.S.-Mexico border on their journey across, and that includes 13 children, right? So, I'm not trying to pull at the heartstrings too much, but this is obviously a tragedy. And
and it's something that could be prevented, I think,
Yes, it's something that can be prevented. I mean, 283 died last year in 2018. I did hear of teenagers in Arizona that were arrested for leaving water bottles on a known path that people were. Yeah, and so, I don't know if that's necessarily the way to be handling this. And that brings me to Trump's policy is deterrence, right? They're going to have a hard stance on the border. They're going to separate families. That's a fact. That's a fact that happens. That's a policy choice that they're separating families. And the goal is to deter immigrants from coming to the United States, to hear that, the U.S. will treat you poorly, don't go. But I think what we're seeing is that's not exactly working, right? No. The total number of migrants, it went down in Trump's first year in 2017 from 2016. But now in 2018, it has gone up since 2017. This is based on source of U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency of total apprehensions on the U.S.-Mexico border. I don't know if you have that link handy, but it does look like 2017 to 2018, there's been an increase.
Yes.
But even then, that's still way less than what we were experiencing in the early 2000s.
Right. And, I think that there's a kind of a large connection of different events that have caused this. But I was reading something interesting. It was out of BBC. And they were saying that actually one of the main reasons that maybe we're more aware of this, I mean, obviously social media in general.
Sure.
I'm sure you've seen them. I've seen them, on CNN, the videos this week of one of the first journalists that got inside one of the detention centers. But another interesting point was that people in even the most remote corners of Central America now have phones and internet devices, allowing them to communicate with their relatives abroad to facilitate the migration process. So I think that this is a kind of a growth in social media from both sides of the aisle. Not aisle, I guess, from both sides of the problem, is that Americans are seeing how, blatantly brutal this last, half a year has been. But also I think people on the other side are seeing that, well, if we get up there, maybe being held in a detention center is better than running from the gang violence that we're currently facing, And so true. I think, there's an incentive. And I just wanted to frame the lens for a second while it's in my mind about the asylum process. Because you mentioned, about 200 people have died on the border so far this year, I think?
Yeah, close to that.
Close to that, yeah. And I do think that part of the issue is that our asylum process is kind of leading people on to want to come up here. I think it's a flawed system that does need to be revamped because basically, I don't question the motive of any of these people that are coming up. It makes total sense to me. But it used to be workers and single men that were fleeing, Central American countries and Mexico. But now you have families bringing all their kids up there because they know that they can't be turned away once they cross.
Right.
And so I think it's just a really broken system. And the problem is, I think the right and the left both are aren't being genuine about the issue, because you have the left basically saying it's a manufactured crisis. I don't know about you, but 200 deaths on the border and 593,000 illegal border crossings. That does sound like a crisis to me.
Yeah, yeah, they're very real, and 600,000 apprehensions or 600,000 migrants crossing in a matter of 9 months. That's a lot. That's a
Yes.
lot, and they need to be accounted for somehow. So no, it's a very real issue. It's a very real issue. I think the point that it's manufactured is the family separations, right?
Yes.
It is now. The family separations is like that's a policy that, granted, was in place before Donald Trump, right? He didn't come up with it, but he was the one that decided to really enforce it. It was not used at all, really, during the Obama administrations, and only in very rare cases. But now it has become the norm as far as dealing with family migrants, and so I think that policy decision had just created an issue where there didn't need to be one. But you're right that the actual root of the problem, right, which is the massive influx of migration from certain countries, that is real. That's real, and that's something we have to deal with together as a nation.
Yeah, and I mean, it's really tough for me because I mean, obviously, you really can't question father and his kids, a mother and her kids, whoever, who are fleeing extreme violence. I mean, I think in the 1980s, Central America had civil wars, and now they're fleeing from gang violence and drug wars. And, you just really can't help but feel really sympathetic for them. But at the same time, I mean, it's not a popular opinion, but I do think there's a certain amount that they are taking advantage of the asylum process.
Sure.
Not everyone. I mean, there have been a few examples of people not even bringing their own kids. I know it's been a very small number. But I just question, I mean, I think it just comes back that if you tell people that they will be granted affirmative asylum, which says that you must be physically present in the United States to grant it, according to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, I think that it's just gonna give a lot of people this extra hope that I'm going to go through the desert and try to swim across the Rio Grande and hope for the best, when in true it's dangerous and not always the better solution.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very valid point. We've tried to have that whole, because of the issue of people coming in, seeking asylum and being like, well, you have to stay in the U.S. to do that. Then they're just never heard from again.
Right.
That is a thing that people have done. We have considered the stay in Mexico idea, right? Where it's, working with Mexican authorities that, well, while they're seeking asylum, they stay in Mexico until they've either been granted asylum or rejected.
Right.
That's something that I think is playing out right now. So we'll have to see how effective that is. If people just kind of disappear into Mexico then, or if they cross again anyway. No, but you're right that there has to be some sort of legitimate process. But I think that we can agree that process does not have to include a detention center where you're not given a toothbrush. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't
Completely.
have to be this brutal of a way to hold people until they're whatever they're a date to bang out asylum or not. It should
Totally.
it just goes against it. Really, honestly, like it just comes again to that being sympathetic to humanity, right? Of course, we want people to have a better life. Of course, we still need to maintain the rule of law, but somewhere in the middle, doesn't need to include really brutal detention centers.
Right. I mean, it's really brutal. And I mean, I think, unfortunately, this all does go back to the rhetoric of our president.
Yeah.
He said it's an invasion. These people are subhuman. And I think that this rhetoric over time, especially to his base, has just kind of led to dehumanization of them.
Yeah.
I don't think that most Americans like what they're seeing. I don't think you could tell me that even Donald Trump likes what's going on. But his Justice Department and the Department of Homeland Security have they've just had no fair policy towards it, And I mean, I think that Obama isn't mentioned enough. I'm not trying to, whataboutism with Obama, but I think that Trump has just had a very conservative Justice Department that has tried to further this more. But I think it's just an existing issue. that because he's such a divisive president at the same time has just amplified it. And his words don't help. He needs to stay off Twitter.
Oh yeah, I mean, you're right though that this issue. I mean, look, it's not like, let's be very clear. It's not like immigration was fine and dandy, and then Trump came in, and then now we have a problem, right? The immigration issue has been on every single politician has talked about it for every election since the 1980s, right? Well, even before that, every influx of massive immigrants in American politics, it's become an issue. Where back when it was Italians and Irish, politicians were talking about Italians and Irish,
right?
And now it's just a different demographic and a different time. But yeah, you're right. It's like it is something that was an issue through Bush and Obama. How do we deal with millions of migrants coming to this country every year? And then now that you're right, that you have the rhetoric of a president that really added gas onto the flame. I think we're just seeing it in it's a bonfire now instead of a small fire.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. And I mean, I think the bottom line of this comes down to is that we need Congress to agree on a bipartisan bill to send more money to the Border Patrol. I know the Border Patrol and ICE are not popular with the left, and for good reason at times, but I do think that we need to just get it out of our heads that the Border Patrol are always bad. These centers are underfunded, they're undermanned, and they were meant to deal with single men for a short period of time.
Yeah, that's true. The training might have to change. You know what I mean? More training to be understanding of families and like accommodating, but then as well as still, adhering to the law and doing it right. But, we shouldn't be arresting people for leaving water out in the desert.
No, that's just pointless. Pointless.
I mean, and look, I mean, to your point that the Border Patrol isn't popular with the left, that's true. That's absolutely true. And I think but there's a reason, right? Like just recently they found that a Facebook group that was frequented by a good portion of the Border Patrol. I think it was like 1 out of every 5 Border Patrol agents was a part of this Facebook group that posted basically like hate memes, and pretty racist stuff. And and so and it's like, well, they're gonna deal with it internally, whatever that means. So we'll see what that happens. But you're right that like we still need Border Patrol. We still need effective Border Patrol. I don't think anyone in the mainstream is at all advocating for open borders. Back to that rhetoric issue that like accusing people of they want open borders, or vice versa, on the right accusing people that you want to lock up every brown person. I think those are extremes, and I don't think that the average person in America thinks like that. So, I think everyone wants to have effective border policy and border patrol, but some things that we're doing really just seem un-American to me.
Completely. This kind of touches into what we talked about last week, the debates. I don't want to hold on to that too much, but I have noticed that what was a fringe on the left has become somewhat more mainstream, is that we need to decriminalize border crossing. We need to have healthcare for illegal immigrants. And I know this is a little off topic, but I think it does touch on an issue I do have, is that, I mean, I think decriminalizing border crossings is almost like the next step towards open borders. I mean, when you're pretty much giving people no deterrence to say, well, you're just going to get a slap on the wrist. Obviously, it's not that easy. I mean, it's a hard process to get across the border, and it's dangerous, but if you take out the decriminalization of it, I think it just incentivizes more people. I think it might just make the problem grow more than decrease.
Yeah, you're right. I think decriminalizing illegal border crossing is kind of a slippery slope. But I think then it's important to remember, like, okay, why are people choosing to cross a dangerous desert where people literally have died instead of going the legal route? And I think it's because the legal route is pretty difficult. There's waiting lists of 5+ years to even just get a chance to get in, and then even then you'd have to pass tests, go through background checks, which is good, right? I do believe that, right? I don't think we should just be taking in criminals and stuff. We want people that have good clean records and are willing to join the society that we've set up. But I think the reason that we have so many illegal crossings is because it's very difficult to get in legally.
True. And, I mean, I've talked to several of my Mexican friends that I have a few Mexican friends that are legal. Their families came there when they're young as legal immigrants, and I have another friend who's I think grandparents came from Eastern Europe, and there is kind of a bit of a survivor complex when you talk to legal immigrants, where they say, "Well, I did it. Why can't you?"
Absolutely.
There's this. Well, I had to go through. I had to find a sponsor. I had to pay. I had to wait. And I do think though the problem is that if we start saying, well, let's just speed this up and decriminalize it or allow faster process, it's kind of like, then what does it mean for those people that actually did everything right?
It's true, but I mean, look, you're right. There's definitely a survivor complex. I personally know a friend who's a Colombian immigrant who has that same idea of like, I took me years and years and years to work hard to get this legally, and now someone illegally can get a driver's license and free healthcare. How is that? How is that fair? Very valid argument. I sympathize that with a lot, and when my friend told me that, it made me rethink how I thought about legal immigration versus illegal immigration, because he's right. That's tough, but I think that making it easier to be legal, it's not a good enough argument to say, well, I had it harder, because you had it harder, and but that's not a good reason to not make it easier on future generations.
That's fair. That's very fair.
I don't know. I mean, it is a tough one. I mean, gosh, that's why this has been an issue for so long, and it's so divisive, because there's no simple solution to this problem.
No, and so I have to ask you. So, what do you think? Lindsey Graham and Dick Durbin are spearheading a Senate bill that looks to reform the asylum system. A quote from Lindsey Graham is that what I've done is take out of the border security plan the acute problem. A wall will not fix this. People are trying to be captured. And basically, he laid out 5 immigration reforms he says the Democrats can accept, such as requiring Central American migrants to apply for asylum from their home countries or Mexico, and providing more money for immigration judges at the border. Do you think this would work?
I think that would help. I don't see any problem with that so far. I mean, yeah, one is, if you do have the issue of where do we put these people, if they're in the United States, right? And then if you say, well, look, you need to get asylum from your home country or from Mexico, that can help not overload detention centers, hopefully.
Right.
So I'm for that. And then, this backlog of all these cases where people, I heard on NPR once, people have to wait months, sometimes a year, to get their case heard by a judge for asylum. So absolutely, if we allocate more money to judges, I think that would help.
Right. And I mean, the only critique I have on it, because I actually like this, because I think Lindsey Graham, even though he's had this weird personality change, which makes sense based on
politics.
His voting core. Yeah. But I've always actually thought he's a pretty pragmatic foreign policy expert. He's always actually, I actually trust his opinion pretty well when it comes to dealing with a lot of foreign policy issues. But my issue with this is that should a migrant have to apply for asylum in their home country if they're fleeing violence from their home country? Like, how does that fix the problem?
Yeah, I mean, also, it also comes back to the idea, like, either you're in your home country in risking gang violence and drug cartel violence, or it's travel across Mexico where you still risk gang and drug cartel violence, as well as the harshness of traveling through Mexico and across the Rio Grande. So I don't know. I mean, it's tough, and it's hard to predict human behavior, right? Like you might do both those things, and people still just go around the system completely.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's really tough, and I just had one more interesting thing. I'm looking through my notes here, and there was a point I highlighted because it was interesting actually, and it talked about actually how the economies of Central America have actually become dependent on migrants abroad. Right. Because it says the economies of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras have become heavily dependent on remittances, which is the money sent home by migrants abroad. Yeah. In some years, remittances account for more than 20% of their GDP.
That's insane.
Yeah.
That is wild, right? That's a fifth of their economy, just people sending back money to their home country. And so, I mean, it's just, I have to imagine that people will always try to get into the United States just because of how much better our economy is and how less susceptible to violence people are here.
Yes.
I don't know. I think there's like, I feel like there's got to be a way for people to like necessarily like work their way in, right? Like literally work their way in. Like if you're like, okay, like if you can get a job and you can report to like, an immigration facility over time, like you prove that you're working, you can prove that you're not up to anything illegal other than the crossing, then we can work towards getting you legal status so that you can pay taxes and then get benefits like healthcare and stuff. I did see here like hold on, shoot, where is it? I saw that refugees. Oh yeah, during the Refugee Act. Now this is back in the 80s. But there was average cost of resettlement was close to $4,000, right? Not cheap. But it says here most refugees eventually paid that amount in federal income taxes. So over time, these refugees were able to pay through taxes the cost of their own resettlement. So I think if you apply that,
interesting.
Yeah. So if you do apply that, like, look, like you could be a legal immigrant, you won't get deported as long as you pop into some center where we can see that you're working. You can start paying a little bit of taxes, and once we've gotten you cleared through background checks and you haven't gotten into trouble over whatever a year or two, then you can get full citizen status. Then you can get real citizen benefits, and pay your taxes. And then hopefully that'll cover the taxes that person will pay over time, will cover the cost of that process it took to make them legal.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. And I mean, I don't think that's a bad idea, and because I think generally if you can, give back to the society that you're living in and be a crucial part of it, then I see there's no problem. Unfortunately, right. We hear these outliers, 2-time deported, middle-aged, illegal immigrant male, stabs or shoots and, kills a up and coming, student or whatnot, and I think unfortunately that's how we've kind of scripted this, especially with the help of Fox News and Trump.
Yeah, that makes the news. People get really scared.
But how do you tell the parents at the same time that the system failed us and your daughter was the collateral?
Yeah, I mean that's obviously tough. I mean, I don't have any sympathy for people that are committing violent crimes. If you're coming in here violent crimes, you should be gone. And it's how do you it is tough because I've heard that same story, right, of the guy who came back twice and then committed violent acts and killed a girl. It's like, Jesus, man. I mean, yeah, how is he getting in twice? No, I mean, look, I agreed with Obama when he said, like, we're going to deport people. And Obama deported a lot of people. It's not.
Yes, he did.
He deported a lot, actually. But I agree with him when he was like, we need to focus on violent criminals, right? People that are not benefits to society. That, like, you ruined your chance. You have no place in the United States if you're going to come here and join a gang or peddle drugs. That's not what we want. But we want hardworking people that will pay into taxes and benefit society.
Yeah, amen. I completely agree. And I think that's the big issue with letting these people just go dark and slip through the cracks. It's a lot more expensive for our healthcare system. It's a lot worse for crime, and it's a lot worse for the economy. So I think actually amnesty, I'm very 50-50 on some of Obama's policies. I'm sure we've talked about that, but I actually was very for amnesty because I think it's better to have a record of people and to have a system in which people are part of it than to just let these people slip through the cracks and only come to the surface when either there's a crime or an emergency or a health scare,
That's a very, very good point. I would say I have to agree. And that will bring us to, I think, the issue of the census question. Just like you said, having a record of people, right? So do you want to give a little context to this issue before we dig into it?
Yes, I would love to. So basically, if I could just put a little bit of a background to it, the census, which is often described as the nation's largest peacetime mobilization. I think that's a really interesting point. It's a very tedious process, and it forms the basis for all the government's population data and is the basis for deciding congressional apportionment.
Yeah.
And so basically, let me look here. I think it was after 1970 no households were asked about citizenship. So there's a rumor going around, mainly on the right, that has said that Obama actually included the citizenship question, which is false. Basically, in the 1940s, the 1950s, I mean, even back in the 1800s, there was a citizenship question on the census. But it is important to note that this question was not meant as a way to actually keep tabs of potential illegal immigrants. It was actually to see how immigrants were assimilating into the system. And I think that's a really interesting point. It was actually more how to see how our system is doing, letting immigrants assimilate, than it is actually as a scare tactic or as an exclusionary measure.
Right.
And so basically, my big issue with the census and the citizenship question is that basically, I think the validity and my stance on the addition of this question depends on the motives in which the Trump administration is using the question. In a perfect world, I don't think that there is any problem with asking people if you're a citizen, because legally speaking, yes, that's probably a good question to know. And also, if you have nothing to hide, you should probably want to answer it. But the problem is I think the Trump administration is using it as a way to manipulate and scare off minority voters from voting. And that is the big critique. And so now in the last week, there was a lot of talk that Trump was going to use affirmative action, or no, sorry, an executive action to go forward with this question on the 2020 census. And from as far as it seems, after many Supreme Court and local court hearings, it sounds like this has been declared unconstitutional. And so I would not say, though, that they are like out of the woodworks yet on this, because it looks like they are still going to be pushing in other means to do it. And I just kind of have a lot of questions for the motives of this, because it does seem like the damage has already been done, is that a lot of minority voters do not feel safe taking part in the census. And that's going to skew a lot of data. I don't know if you have anything you want to add. Sorry, that was my rant of the day here.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah. I mean, because you also have people that are residents, and then, residents of states that might have illegal status federally, right? That might fear putting a non-citizen on that, and then not participate in the census, right? Because I go back to, and I like, your analysis is interesting, right? His motive, and obviously his motive played into the Supreme Court, because they said, give us a good reason for why we should allow this, and they couldn't, and
right.
So the courts shot it down. I think also it's like, right, what is the point of the census? Well, the point of the census is to get an accurate statistical data of the United States.
Right.
NPR has found that if you do add a citizenship question, like you said, people will get scared and be less encouraged to accurately fill out the census. So then you would have a less accurate representation of the data if you added that question. Now, back to what you said about it in a perfect world, I agree with that, because when I first heard this issue, I was like, oh, I'm surprised that it wasn't already on there. But then, because I was like, well, in a perfect world, you're right. It would just be another box you check, and then that would be it. It'd just be data. But the matter is, unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world. And it looks like that adding that question would actually taint the data. It would make the data not as accurate to the reality. And if that's the point of the census, which it is, right? It's the only point of a census, is to get accurate data. Then you shouldn't put it in. If it's going to ruin the data, then you shouldn't add that question.
It's a very good point, and I'm not going to jump out on a limb yet about it, because obviously no one in the administration has blatantly said it's to deter minority voters and skew their responses. But I read a case from ABC News reported that earlier this month, a chilling message arrived at the Chicago office of the ACLU. It was a fake flyer that surfaced online calling on immigrants to boycott the 2020 census. It said, if you get a census form, do not fill it out. ICE will find you and deport you. And I think we're already seeing that just the discussion of having this question is already sending a lot of people into a scared frenzy. And it's just worrying, because this is a president who's had a Muslim ban and policies on immigration at the southern border that have been controversial.
Yeah.
So you really can't tell a lot of nervous immigrants, oh yeah, but also tell us if you're a citizen. Don't worry, we're just going to use it for data only.
Right. Right. It's like I was saying about the tainting, right? The fact that it's such a bit in the news, and if that's flyers going around. First of all, this is just a side thing, but that flyer to me sounds like some propaganda. Like it sounds to me like some Russian, like
Yes,
trying to
yes,
muck up trouble. Because I mean, let's not forget that Russian trolls operated pro MAGA and like Black Lives Matter Facebook groups, right? Sometimes
yes, yes.
sometimes the same troll would post against his other account. So, man, I'm so skeptical of anything crazy like a flyer or any kind of propaganda like that. But
Oh, I completely agree.
but it's already worked, right? The fact that people are scared and we're talking about this, it may be too late. It may be that the census will already be a little bit inaccurate because whether or not the Supreme Court decision, or whether or not Donald Trump goes through with his executive order, which I heard he's not, by the way. I think he decided against it. Well, but we'll see with
Yes.
him. I mean, we can't really know. But you might be right. It might already be tainted as far as like accurate data for next year.
Oh, completely. And I mean, and I also like I was reading this from 538, and it was talking about, unfortunately, Trump's case was not supported even. I mean, he just has a weak argument basically because Wilbur Ross, the Secretary of Commerce, said that the main idea of the citizenship data is to help enforce the Voting Rights Act. But 3 lower court judges have concluded that the evidence shows that he had already decided to add this question long before the Justice Department used that as a pretext. So I'm just worried that they are now just trying to find whatever BS motive or excuse they can to add this. And you really do have to question the motives there,
Yeah, exactly, right. Exactly. Because if you're throwing out anything that sticks, then okay, then what's the real motive? Because it's obvious that you're throwing darts.
I kind of picture, I mean, I kind of picture, I don't know, certain members of the administration, they're sitting in an office just waiting for the tweets to go out and the media sources to have a new article. And then they just go into a bag and start digging out names or solutions. And they're like, all right, well, let's cross off this one. This didn't work. So why don't we try, okay, Voting Rights Act. That sounds like a good one. I just feel like they're just kind of doing a process of elimination. And that's kind of how a lot of their policies seem to have been. I mean, the Muslim ban is another example,
Yeah, I mean, gosh, the executive branch of the federal government and the judicial branch of the federal government have been at odds. Even with a quote unquote stacked conservative Supreme Court, I mean, almost everything Trump does gets attacked by lower courts, and it makes its way up. And it's I mean Trump has even said he's like he hates the liberal judges, and judges in California are ruining his policies and all this stuff. I mean, it's been. I mean, look, if you're younger, right, in high school or college right now in political science, it's a great time to learn about balance and checks and balances because
completely
this is it, right? This is it. This census question is a perfect example of this. The courts being like, I don't think this makes any sense. Your legal argument is not sound. We're deeming this unconstitutional.
Right. And yeah, I guess you and I probably missed out by about 2 years, unfortunately. Yeah. Imagine the discussions we could have had during all this. You know what I mean? But so, okay. So rapid fire. So if you are working for the Trump administration, and you are trying to now reframe a more justifiable, I don't know, method to actually getting citizenship data. Say your motives are actually clear and true. How would you be able to, I don't know, market this in a better light? I know.
I mean,
that's a tough question.
It's tough to be put on the spot, right? I mean, I don't know. You have to have some sort of established like earmark, right? That's like the data obtained by the 2020 census will not be used, or the certain questions, right? Certain parts of the census will not be well, no, I mean, it would be public information. I was going to say, like, the citizenship question should not be disclosed to something like ICE. But
right, that'd be interesting.
But I also think that sets a bad precedent, right? Government agencies hiding info from each other. That's not really a good precedent to set. No. So I don't know if I actually go back. I retract my idea. I don't know. I mean, that's a tough question. Again, I think it also it's the reality of the times. I think if there was not this political rhetoric and this huge issue around it, I don't think people would have a problem with the citizen question. But it's because of the rhetoric of the administration and the actions by ICE and stuff that people worried. So I'm sorry, but I just don't know how I would go about it.
No, I mean, I think that's a good analysis. You just kind of have to question why have no previous presidents tried to bring it back since the 1960s and 70s? You have to kind of wonder. Like, there's obviously it's a very difficult legal and it's sometimes moral question about it.
Yeah. Well, like you've heard me say countless times before, right? Everything is always way more complex than it originally comes off.
Completely. And so, I mean, I think it's going to be interesting. I think 2020 is just going to have just a large multitude of just factors that are going to be slamming into all the candidates and President Trump, during this discussion. I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see where we are in the next couple of years into 2020. The border, I think the border is going to, and just immigration, the citizenship question. I think that this 2020 election is going to be mainly focused on immigration. I really do.
Immigration and healthcare. I think those two, immigration and healthcare, is going to be the biggest things. And then thirdly, kind of wrapped into both, is the economy, right? I think everything ties back to the economy a little bit, right? What's that one Democratic strategist who said it's the economy, stupid?
Yeah.
He worked for Bill Clinton. I forget. I can see his face. He's that Southern guy with the bald head and the glasses. James Carville.
James Carville.
He said it's the economy, stupid.
And I mean, I think that pretty much sums up Trump's presidency in a nutshell. Is that if the economy wasn't doing great, I bet you would see a lot of conservatives start questioning his judgment a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, on that note, I think before we're out of time, I do want to talk about just a few other things, because I mean, it's just been a week of the news cycle is just never ending. I mean, you and I could make this a 3-hour podcast and still not have enough time.
Yeah, well, hey, I mean, CNN makes it 24 hours every day.
True. Let's not go that far.
Yeah, I agree.
24-hour podcast. That's the future.
We're never not streaming.
Oh God. But I mean, so there's a couple things. I know we didn't. There's Epstein and Congressman Amash. Those were probably my two biggest other talking points this week. But for now, let's just talk about Epstein, because it's just been a whirlwind of controversy involving him this week. I don't know. Tell us a little bit of background. What Epstein?
Well, Jeffrey Epstein is an American financier. He's a billionaire. He is well connected and well known in the high echelons of wealthy life in America. But he has had a litany of sex offenses and charges brought upon him. One of his main cases, he was basically, he was prostituting teenage girls, right? He was officially charged of he was officially charged with prostitution, which had a very different end result than sex trafficking.
Yes.
But he was sex trafficking young women, and he would criticize. So a lot of things are going on. So that was an old charge where Acosta was the prosecutor, and gave him a sentence where he could go to work during the day, then come home to jail, and he could spend most of his sentence in a mansion. So a lot of people are saying, that's a little weird, right? Like, if anyone else was, sex trafficking, you would be put in jail for a long time in maximum security. And so then now that he's again in the spotlight for new charges, which, he hasn't, the court case is pending, right? So he's in custody and he's awaiting to be, charged and arraigned and everything. But so now, but he has connections to a lot of high upper echelon people. So, Acosta in the Trump administration, who just recently resigned. And he's been friends with Donald Trump. He's been friends with Bill Clinton. And I heard this one, which is funny, is he used to be friends with Kevin Spacey. So you're like, man, these guys, birds of a feather, if I've ever seen one.
Oh God. Yeah. It's alarming to me, I just kind of my personal opinion on it, because, this is all coming now, the politics of it are coming back to Trump and Clinton specifically.
Yeah.
Two men that are no ghosts to bad attention for their sexual acts.
Yeah.
but I think it was Ben Shapiro actually had a decent point. I don't usually quote him too often, but he had a really good point. Was that there's one thing, questioning the actions of Trump and Clinton, but it was with overaged women, not 14-year-old girls, and at the same time is that just because a billionaire who is also a registered sex offender is hanging out with these politicians does not particularly link them together, because a lot of billionaires hang out with politicians. That's just the way it is. Politicians want influence. Billionaires want influence. Politicians need money, and it's just kind of that revolving door. It's not a good look that Trump said that he's a lot of fun to be with. It's even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. Not a good look.
No,
not a good look.
not
That
good.
did not age well.
Look,
I think, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I said, Ben Shapiro is right if it's just a photo. If it's just a photo of them at some Met Gala and they're shaking hands and that's it, then yeah, of course, no, you can't assume that he knows everything about Jeffrey Epstein's dark side. But the problem is, it's not just a photo. It's the fact that we have a serious history of sexual misconduct from the president that stands on its own as very troublesome at best, and then you have him connected with this guy, and then like you said, the comment like, "Oh, I know he likes young women, and I respect that." So it's more than just like a photo, right? It's
Yeah.
These guys seem to be two birds of a feather.
Yeah.
I can only give Donald Trump the benefit of a doubt so many times before it's like, how many women have come out and being like, yeah, this guy's a creep.
But I mean, just to distinguish it though, there have been no charges with children or young underage women for him. And obviously I really question his moral compass. I really do. And yes, there are some, what was it? The Miss America pageant?
Yeah.
Where
people were saying that he was going in the back room and stuff.
Yes. And so, yeah, it's not a good look for sure, but I'm a little bit hesitant to jump out on a limb and say that he's also involved in underage sex.
No,
I think it's too early.
I'm not saying that, but I'm because we don't have any evidence that Donald Trump is in the same issue with Jeffrey Epstein, right? But right. I think the point is that we seem to, as a society, have different standards for people at this level of wealth and power than we do for the average man, right? Jeffrey Epstein was chilling in his mansion for prostituting a 14-year-old girl. Donald Trump seems to just, as long as you can pay out the people that accuse you, then you're fine. Bill O'Reilly did that for years until it eventually caught up with him. But it seems like there's a different, we're supposed to believe that justice is blind, but it doesn't seem like that. It seems like justice is taking a couple 20s in the pocket before they seem to, before they're charging these guys. So
yeah, and I'm really sorry to interrupt. I'm just really concerned that I forget. I think it was in 2008, 2009. Let me see. I think it was 2008. It's a little bit worrying that the FBI had to get involved in the investigation into Epstein because it was deemed that the Miami prosecutors were not doing a good job. They were not putting a fair investigation into it. It's pretty bad when the FBI has to step in and say, yeah, we don't really trust what you're actually doing with this case.
Yeah, that is bad. Yeah, that's right. It takes two to tango, right? Jeffrey Epstein has a lot of money and power and wealth, or did. And, it's also prosecutors, nudge, nudge, cough, cough, Alexander Acosta, who give him plea deals that are super lenient compared to what anyone else without this kind of wealth and power would experience, right? You would not, gosh, if you or I, for God forbid, and of course we wouldn't, were found prostituting young women, we wouldn't be given plea deals to go home, and go to work during the day. No, we'd be in jail for a very, very justifiably long time.
Yeah.
I don't want you to think that I'm connecting Trump to this current issue with Epstein, but it just brings up, again, we're in a Me Too or kind of post Me Too culture where I think society as a whole is trying to figure out how to handle, wow, there's been a lot of powerful men that have gotten away with stuff for a long time, and some of them continue to do so. So, it's kind of there's just a paradigm shift happening, and I think Epstein and his connections to Bill Clinton and Donald Trump is just alarming, right? It's just really alarming.
Very excellent point. Yeah, and I like, I mean, kind of back on the post Me Too movement comment you had, you know, and I think actually one of the big issues is I think the Me Too movement's been great, and it's also been detrimental. Because we seem to kind of cast an iron fist with every case exactly the same, you know, and I think there are different degrees of it. And unfortunately, because the fist is put down on what's his name, Aziz Ansari, the same as Weinstein, unfortunately, it's muddled the waters enough that people now really are questioning it, you know. And
well, look, at the height of the outrage, you know, you were right. Like when I remember when Aziz Ansari got his whole thing, and he was like, you know, articles came out like, is he the next to get quote unquote Me Too'd? But since now that the dust has settled, it is apparent that there is a difference, right? Harvey Weinstein is in jail and not going to get out. Aziz Ansari is back doing stand-up, and he's going to have more shows. So the justice system at least recognizes the difference, you know, and that's good. I think the culture of like Twitter outrage is different, right? But the Twitter outrage aren't the ones prosecuting these guys. So you are right that, you know, there is definitely an outrage culture that takes things too far. But if we look at the justice system, you know, and Aziz Ansari is not in jail, and he I don't know why would he be? He didn't really do anything wrong. But
he just kind of sounded like he's bad. He's a bad first
he was kind of he's an awkward guy. He's an awkward guy.
But see, my problem is that you're right. Like legally, nothing has changed if you haven't done anything just detrimental. But this cancel culture, it almost can ruin your life. Like I like to look at the Al Franken example.
True, right?
Who I mean, let's just say I'm really torn on this one because basically it was not correct. You know, the picture, what was he on a helicopter?
He was doing an inappropriate joke. Yeah.
Right. And it was clear that the intention was to be funny. Obviously, a lot of people did not find it funny, and it was inappropriate. But that being said, I just find it just very ironic that he had the morals to step down. But you have so many other people, especially on the right. I mean, Donald Trump, number one example, that have done far worse and still won't even admit any wrongdoing, you know? And so, and like now, I mean, Louis C.K., another example, you know? I mean, he, now they're trying to now there's a big push on social media to get rid of all of his work, to pretty much erase what he's done. And I think he was creepy and wrong, but should we erase someone's whole quiver of art because of their actions?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I mean, this conversation could down so many avenues, right? Like, do you separate art from artist? Can people reform, right? Like, is there a certain, like, how long do you quote unquote cancel someone? And I think you and I are kind of like, we have similar opinions, right? Like, I mean, it's a case by case basis, of course, like, you know, but you know, someone like a Louis C.K., right? Like, I don't know. I mean, he's back. He's also doing stand up again as well. I mean, he's doing small clubs. He's not going to get a Netflix special anytime soon. But you know, but he can still live and work. I think your point about like Al Franken, back to politics. You know, that's a tough question, right? Is one bad, really inappropriate joke, is that worth taking down someone's entire career? That's a tough question. I lean towards it's not. I don't think he should have had to like ruin his whole career. But politically, if I'm speaking as a political strategist, he absolutely had to step down. Had to step down, because if you wanted the Me Too movement to have any sort of political legitimacy, especially because it's coming from the left mostly, then you can't allow for any inch of hypocrisy, right? So as soon as Al Franken heard that, I mean, you knew it was done. You knew Nancy Pelosi called him like, Al, I love you, buddy, but you gotta go. We can't stand behind a Me Too movement, but then have our own side have hypocrisy, right?
Very, very good point. Very good point. I really can't disagree whatsoever about that. You know, it's just going to be interesting to see how this goes. And I mean, I kind of my fault. Sorry, I took us off topic a bit. But,
that's okay.
But
that's okay. Sometimes tangents lead to great jams. So I have no problem going on a little tangent.
Definitely. And I mean, I mean, back on Epstein for just a moment. Like, I'm just really concerned that not only his argument, but Acosta's argument and one of Manhattan's prosecutors' argument was, how come these victims weren't more outspoken, and why didn't they come out earlier about these charges. That was their argument, and that is just despicable.
Yeah, that is not. Yeah, that is such a non-argument. I mean, again, that's classic victim blaming, right? I mean,
Right.
you ask any psychologist of why victims don't come forward. There's a plethora of reasons that are, it's traumatizing experience. There's social stigmas. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things of why victims don't come forward immediately. So, and then again, there's issues with this case with the victims from Acosta's side where they were not informed of the sentencing of Epstein, and which you need to do. So, the fact that there's a victim blaming issue when the victims were actually wronged by this justice system, it is, like you said, it's despicable.
Right. And one more point about this, and then we should probably start slowly wrapping this bad boy up. But what do you think about Acosta's defense that if he let me see here, he said during a news conference, federal prosecutors' intervention was what guaranteed Epstein would receive jail time. So he's defending the prostitution charges that he pushed for, saying that it's the only way they would have actually got Epstein, which I don't know. I mean, that's an interesting argument.
I don't know. I don't buy it. I mean, it's like, okay, maybe that's true, right? Maybe his intervention was the only reason he would get some jail time, but that still doesn't mean you're still giving him a better sentencing than anyone else would receive, right? It's like, well, nothing would have happened without me, but you're still not justice is still not blind. It's not good enough, right? It's like, okay, sure, maybe in the future we need to make sure that prosecutors are well equipped to handle this stuff and that we have oversight, like you said, the FBI oversight. And then he shouldn't be living in a mansion when he was just prostituting girls. Like, that's not it's basically saying like, well, nothing would have happened without me. That's not a good excuse. That's like taking away the handball from the handball court because you get mad.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I think the biggest question that has come out of this, I was reading, I think it was in the New York Times a few days ago, and they were talking about the big question is, where did Epstein get his money from? And there's a lot of speculation that it was involved in this sex trafficking ring.
Gosh.
That it looks like he was kind of selling and moving sex amongst the higher echelon in New York City, Washington, and Miami.
Jesus, that is disgusting.
Yeah, and I mean, it kind of does go back to there has been there's a lot of whispers in Washington about there is a lot of child sex, underage actions that have been involved there, and that's just awful.
I don't doubt it. I mean, the UK has been slowly discovering that as well. There's been a high profile with they had an entertainer. They had a TV show entertainer that had a kids segment who was prostituting kids. I don't doubt that this stuff happens, and that's why. But before we just wrap up real quick, I'm definitely on the side of look, wherever this leads us, right? Whoever is named as a connection, take them down. There's no team here. If it's Bill Clinton, if it's Hillary Clinton, take them down. They deserve to be punished. There's no no one should be safe, right? No one should be safe from this.
No, not.
Wherever this rabbit hole leads, if it leads anywhere, if Jeffrey Epstein decides to, talk or whatever, we'll see. But wherever this rabbit hole leads, I mean, that's where it leads, and justice needs to be had.
I completely agree. And I think that's a great spot to wrap this up.
All right.
It's been a great conversation. I appreciate it. Yeah, this has been fun.
This has been a great episode. So, guys, this has been a Tonic Accord episode 2. You can find us on Podbean, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Apple Podcasts. Is that correct, Alex?
Yes. Yeah, we are finally on Apple Podcasts as well. And once we have 5 episodes, we can then submit the podcast to Spotify as well.
So if you enjoyed this episode, we do want to hear from you. Find us on YouTube. Leave a comment. Leave us a comment on Instagram. Anything. We want to get interact with you guys as much as possible. Let us know any questions you have or any thoughts you had, and we might reference it in the next show. We really encourage it. We want to hear from you guys.
Yes. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next week.
Take care.